news. So yeah, now by the time this has uploaded and all that one would have news has already been long uploaded and all that. So yeah, here as I said in the news, today's country is Denmark. So yeah, as I've got a lot for you today. So yeah. Like the majority of it being like history and legends. Whereas I briefly go over the language and all. So yeah, here we go. Let's not waste any time, as the script's like 10 pages long. So yeah, the first humans in Denmark arrived at around 10,000 BC, after the end of the last ice age. And the first Danes were Stone Age hunters and fishermen. However, from about 4000 BC, farming was introduced into Denmark, and the early Danish farmers used stone tools and weapons. But around 1800 BC, bronze was first introduced, and Danish craftsmen soon became experts at making goods from bronze. And around 500 BC, iron was also introduced to Denmark. And in the Iron Age, Danes had contact with what we now know to be Romans, as they sold Roman merchants slaves, fur skins and amber in return for Mediterranean luxuries. And from about 200 AD, Danes started to use runes, which is kind of like a form of writing system for inscriptions and all. After the fall of the Roman Empire in the west in the 5th century, the Danes continued to trade with the eastern half of the Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire. And like the rest of European, Denmark suffered a terrible outbreak of a plague in the 6th century, which killed a large percentage of the population. But despite this, trade did continue to flourish. And in the 8th century, the first trading settlements in Denmark grew up at Hedeby and Ribe. And continuing into the 9th century, Denmark was divided into different kingdoms, but in the 10th century it more or less became one kingdom. And during the same time, in the 9th and 10th centuries, the Danes raided other parts of Europe such as England and Ireland, but they were more than just raiders, as the Danes created the first towns in Ireland like Limerick, Cork and Dublin. And in the early 9th century, the Danes raided English monasteries and took people as slaves. However, in the 9th century, they turned from raiding to conquest, and in 865 the Danes invaded England, which essentially divided England into 3 kingdoms at the time. Now in 874 the only southernmost kingdom remained, while until the leader Alfred the English defeated the Danes in 878. A year later, in 879, Alfred and the Danish leader Guthrum had made a treaty, and England was divided between them, as the Danes took the eastern parts, and Guthrum also became a Christian. And the Danish conquered parts of England as was called Danelaw, and over the following decades the English conquered piece by piece, and the English and the Danes settled down and lived together more or less peacefully. But in 1002, Ethelred the Unready became king of England, or the massacre of Danish settlers, and among the dead were relatives of the Danish king Svein Forkbeard. Svein became king of Denmark around 985, and in 1000 he conquered Norway. Enraged by the murder of his relatives, he attacked England and demanded money in compensation. Afterwards, for some years, Svein demanded money for not attacking England, but in 1013 he drove out the English king Ethelred and became king of England. but died a year later in 1014, and his son Canute fled to Denmark fearing the revenge of Ethelred. And a year after that, in 1015, Norway became independent of Denmark, but Ethelred died in 1016, and some English were willing to accept Canute as king, but some elected that man named Edmund Ironside, and the two then fought for the crown. As Edmund was defeated, but Canute allowed him to rule part of England until his own death. Currently Edmund died in the same year of 1016, and Canute then became King of England, as well as Denmark. And in 1028 he conquered Norway and became the ruler of the Northern Empire. But this empire did not survive long after his death and all. And England became independent in 1042, and Norway became independent 5 years later in 1047. And in 826, taking it back a few years, a monk named Ansgar went to Hedeby to try and convert Danes to Christianity, but he had little success. In about 960, King Harald Bluetooth became a Christian, and most of his subjects kind of followed him. And in 1047, Sweden Estridsson became king of Denmark, and he increased the power of the crown, and during his reign Denmark was divided into 8 bishoprics. A bishopric being an area presided over by a bishop, and Sweden was followed by 5 of his sons in turn. But in 1131, the king's son Magnus the Strong murdered one of his relatives, Knut Lavard, fearing that Knut may try to claim the throne one day. The result was a civil war that dragged on for about 26 years, until Valdemar, the son of Knut, became king of Denmark in 1157. And Valdemar went to war with people called the Wends, who lived between the River Elbe and the River Oder. And in 1169 he captured an island called Rügen, and in 1184 his son Absalom conquered Pomerania and Mecklenburg, and his brother Valdemar II, known as Victorious, followed him, as Valdemar II was ambitious and wished to control the Baltic. And by 1215 he controlled all the land between Elbe and the Oder, and in 1219 he invaded Estonia, which I mentioned in those parts last Friday. And he questioned Estonians at the Battle of Leidenis and became their ruler. But in 1223 Valdemar was captured by a German prince, and in what was released in 2 years later in 1225 on condition he surrendered all his conquests except Rügen and Estonia. And in side facts, in 1346 the Danish king, desperate for money, saw Estonia, and in Viking times land of Denmark was found on a 2-field system. One half was sowed with crops and one half was left fallow. And in the 12th century a more advanced 3-field system was used, as the land was one was sowed with spring crops, one with autumn crops, while the third was left fallow. And Denmark grew steadily richer, and the trade in the Baltic region began to prosper, and Danish towns grew larger and gradually became more important. But by 1349-1350, Denmark, like the rest of Europe, was more devastated by the Black Death, which killed an estimated third of the population. Later in the century, a lady named Margaret became regent of both Denmark and Norway. In 1388, Swedish nobles rebelled against their king and declared Margaret regent of Sweden. and in 1389 her soldiers captured the Swedish king, although his supporters held out in Stockholm until 1398. No, it wasn't. 1398 as it started in 1389. And in 1397, grandson of a sister was crowned king of Denmark, Sweden and Norway at Kalmar. And the Union of Three Kings was called the Union of Kalmar, with the capital in Copenhagen. But in 1434 a rebellion broke out in Sweden, and it spread, and in 1348 Erik was deposed as king of Denmark, and in 1439, a year later in 1439, he was deposed as king of Sweden, and in 1442 as king of Norway, and in 1414 he was replaced as king of Denmark by his nephew Christopher, who later became king of Sweden and Norway as well. And Christopher died in 1448, and the union broke up, and in 1449 the Danes elected Count Christian of Oldenburg as king, and in 1481 John became king of Denmark, and in 1483 he also became king of Norway. The Swedes also recognised him as their king, but was not actually crowned until 1497. Furthermore, his reign over Sweden was pretty short-lived. In 1501 the Swedes rebelled against him, and from 1506 to 1513 John fought against Sweden but failed to regain the Swedish crown. But his son Christian II was made king of Sweden in 1520, and like his predecessor before him, his reign was also short, as the Danes rebelled against Christian and was imprisoned him in 1523. And his uncle was made King Frederick I of Denmark and Norway in his place, and meanwhile Swedes chose one of their own people as king of Sweden after Sweden was separated from Denmark forever this time. And when Frederick I died in 1533, the Reformation was splitting Europe apart, tearing Europe to shreds, and his oldest son Christian favoured Lutheranism, while his younger son Hans was brought up a Catholic, and after Frederick's death the election of the new king was postponed for a year, and then in 1534 the people of Lubeck sent an expedition under Count Christopher of Oldenburg to demand that the former king Christian II be released from prison and reinstated. And the expedition landed in New Zealand, and civil war soon ensued, and the people of Copenhagen spotted the expedition, and the people of Jutland rose in rebellion in support of ex-king Christian. But a man named John Rantzau, a Lutheran noble, crushed the rebellion in Jutland, and the Danes defeated Lubeck at sea. In 1536, Copenhagen was starved into submission, and the civil war known as Count's War ended, and subsequently Lutheranism became the religion of Denmark. And by that time both Denmark and Sweden sort of controlled the Baltic states. The result of it was a war in the years 1563 to 1570, and either side was able to totally defeat the other, and the Peace of Stettin ended the war, and the devastation caused by the war was followed by a long period of peace. However, the King of Denmark was forced to pay for the war, partly by imposing taxes on farmers and partly by charging duties of cargo through the Sound. And in 1611 to 1613 another war was fought between Denmark and Sweden. Neither side was able to defeat the other, and meanwhile Christian IV, who lived from 1588 to 1648, founded new towns in Denmark. Denmark gained overseas possessions, but Christian insisted on intervening in the 30 Years' War in Germany. That lasted from 1618 to 1648, but In 1626, the Danish army was severely defeated and forced to retreat, and the enemy occupied Jutland for 18 months. And in 1629, Christian made a peace treaty by the Treaty of Lubeck, and in 1643, Denmark and Sweden fought again, as Denmark was defeated and forced to make peace in 1645. The Danes and Swedes fought again in 1658 to 1660. As you can kind of tell, Sweden and Denmark don't really have the best of relationships. The Treaty of Copenhagen ended the war, and for Denmark the terms were humiliating, as the Danish king was forced to surrender territory to the Swedish king, and the Swedes were also granted exemptions from tolls charged on shipping passing through the Sound, and kind of like the bit between, like the what it was between Sweden and Denmark. And after the war, the King of Denmark greatly increased his power. And in 1660, the Danish Assembly and the Riksdag granted him aristocratic powers, and from then on the Danish king was an absolute monarch, or at least he was in theory. And in 1675 to 1679, Denmark and Sweden went to war again, as the Danish admiral Niels Juel defeated the Swedes at sea. Nonetheless, after the war, the Danes were forced to surrender Skåne in southern Sweden. By 1700, the population of Denmark was about 2/3 of a million. And during the 18th century, Denmark was more of an mainly agricultural society, and little industry where peasants were not free. And everyone had to live in the village. He was born in between the ages of 4 and 40, and he had to spend some time working on his landlord's land rather than his own. Denmark took part in the Great Northern War of 1709 to 1720 against Sweden, but at the war's end had little to show for it. However, most of the 18th century was a peaceful time for Denmark, as they had quite a large merchant navy piling up behind them. And in 1784, Crown Prince Frederick was regent of Denmark and introduced reforms, as peasants were made free and no longer had to work on their landlord's land, and tenant farmers often became small landowners. Furthermore, rich landowners no longer had the right to physically punish their tenants, like whipping them and all, and the trade was also deregulated and tariffs on imported goods were cut. And moving on into the 19th century or 1800s, during the war the British Navy tried to stop France importing raw materials, so they stopped and searched vessels from neutral countries. In 1794, Denmark and Sweden formed an armed neutrality to stop the British doing it. In 1800, Russia and Prussia joined, and Britain decided to take action, and in 1801 a British fleet under Nelson attacked a Danish fleet in Copenhagen harbour and destroyed part of it. And in 1805 the French fleet was destroyed at Trafalgar. But Britain might have been a little paranoid at the time and feared that the French might seize a Danish fleet and use it to attack Britain. And the British fleet then attacked Copenhagen, and the British ships bombarded the city and fired rockets at it, and parts of Copenhagen were burned. Copenhagen was forced to surrender, and the British took the Danish fleet, but worse was still to come. And in 1813 the Swedes attacked Norway, and in 1814 Denmark was forced to surrender Norway to them. And a brighter note, in 1814 universal primary education was introduced into Denmark. And during the 19th century the king's power was gradually reduced, and in 1834 the king created 4 assemblies, called diets, for the islands, including Iceland, Jutland, Schleswig, and Holstein, and the only men who introduced a certain amount of property could vote, and the Diets only had the powers to advise the king, but it was kind of like the smaller cogs in something, attending something much larger. Furthermore, between 1837 and 1841, the local self-government was created in Denmark, yet the Liberals demanded more reforms. So in 1849, King Frederick VII agreed to a new constitution. A new assembly was formed, made up of two houses, the Folketing and Landsting, and freedom of the press and of religion were all also granted in Denmark. And joined to Denmark were two duchies, Holstein and Schleswig, as Holstein was German, but Schleswig had a mixed German and Danish population. As the Danes tried to make Schleswig an integral part of Denmark. As a result of rebellion began in Schleswig Holstein, and the war against Schleswig-Holstein ended in January 1851 by agreement of 1851 and 1852, and Danes agreed not to try and make Schleswig closer to Denmark than Holstein. The war began again in 1864. Despite the agreement, Denmark tried to absorb Schleswig in 1863, and on the 1st of February 1864, Prussian and Austrian forces crossed Ada, and the Danes fought bravely, but the Germans occupied Jutland, and they captured the island of Iris, which was in a Danish stronghold. So, and the 20th of July peace talks began. In October, the two duchies were surrendered to Prussia and Austria by the Treaty of Vienna. Despite the disaster, the Danish economy grew rather rapidly in the late 19th century, and land was drained for farming, like the brewing and sugar beet industries began to boom. Engineering and shipbuilding started to flourish, and at the same time Copenhagen grew rapidly, and by 1911 it had a population of 560,000, and in 1870 only about 25% of the population was urban, and by 1901 it had reached 44%, and in more present day it's stands somewhere around 70%, if not more by now. And Denmark remained neutral during the First World War. In 1915 the constitution was changed to make it more democratic, and as women in Denmark were granted the right to vote. And Denmark suffered severely during the Depression of the 1930s as unemployment soared, and at the worst points in 1932 and 33 it reached like 32%, and the government responded by creating public work to reduce numbers of unemployed, and at the same time a number of laws were passed to create a generous welfare state. And when the Second World War began in 1939, Denmark stayed neutral, but the Germans occupied Denmark in 1940. And it ends on the 9th of April 1940. German army crossed the border, and German troops transport sailed into Copenhagen, and Germans threatened to bomb Copenhagen, so the Danes surrendered. At first, the Germans treated the Danes leniently, as they wanted a Danish food supply, but Danish resistance gradually increased. Acts of sabotage took place on in August, 29th of August 1941. The Germans decided to kind of clamp down on it all, and they declared a state of emergency as the Danish army was disarmed, and the Danish fleet was seized. And the Danish cabinet was replaced by a group of civil servants who ran the country. And during the Second World War, nearly 7,000 Danish Jews were smuggled into Sweden, which saved them from like a fate that was much worse. And after a German surrender in May 1945, 45 Danes were executed for collaborating with the Nazis and all. But the country benefited from martial aid, which was given by the USA in years of 1948 to 1953. It helped Denmark recover from the war, and in 1949 Denmark joined NATO. And then again in 1953 the Danish constitution was changed again. The 1960s were a year of prosperity for Denmark, as there was full employment. Danish agriculture became highly mercantilized and Danish industry grew rapidly. And in 1973 Denmark joined the common markets, which was kind of like a forerunner for the EU. And television began in Denmark in 1951. But unfortunately in the late 1970s, the Danish economy started to deteriorate a little bit as unemployment rose, as it reached 10% in 1983, and in the 1980s government introduced austerity measures to try and curb the inflation. And yeah, moving on into the 21st century, the Danish economy began to flourish and unemployment was low. Unlike the rest of Europe, Denmark was suffered by the 2009 recession but recovered. And today Denmark is a prosperous country with a high standard of living, and the population stands about somewhere around 5.6 million. So yeah, moving on to language, which is like a short paragraph in the middle of all this. As the Danish language is Danish Dansk. The official language of Denmark is spoken by more than 5 million people, and is also spoken in a few communities south of the German border, and is also taught in the schools in the Faroe Islands and of Iceland and of Greenland. Danish belongs to the East Scandinavian branch of the North Germanic languages, and began to separate from other Scandinavian languages, to which it's closely related about 1000 AD, and the oldest Danish records are runic inscriptions from about 250 to 800 AD, found in Jutland from Jutland to southern Sweden, and the earliest manuscripts in Danish date from the 13th century. Yeah, now I've got the big task of legends, which shouldn't hopefully be as long as history, but yeah. As Denmark has some old legends of heroes, of churches and manor houses, of hills, fields and moorlands. As some of the stories date from like the Great Plagues, like war and peace, and live on in books and tongues of the people, as it can fly very far. Yeah. There's like about 7 of them, like first being like, as they aren't really titled, like the first being starting off like this. In the olden days when invaders were ravaging the Danish countryside, it happened that the pitched battles were fought. Of course, and the Danes had won, and that evening many dead and many wounded men lay on the stricken field. One was an enemy who had lost both. Star Wars Episode 9 begins shooting next week. Returning and new cast members have been sighted now. One of them was an enemy who had lost both his legs by a shot. And nearby a Danish soldier had taken a flask filled with beer from his pocket and put it to the mouth when the desperately wounded man begged him for a drink. As the soldier bent down to give a bottle to his enemy, the wounded man discharged his pistol at him, but he missed his aim, and the soldier took the bottle back and drank half of it, and he handed the rest to his enemy, and Colin said, like, "You rascal, no, you will only get half of it." And when the king was told this, in memory of the deed he granted the soldier, and to his descendants a noble coat of arms, of which are blazoned a bottle like half full. I kind of love that story. And then the second one is like it's kind of like a tradition of like the church bell of Faroum. Right, there was a parsonage there and the church standing side by side. Sorry, parsonage and this church standing side by side. It was a dark night late in the fall as the minister was sitting at work upon his Sunday sermon when he heard a large church bell sound. Very lightly and very strangely, no wind was blowing, and he could not account for the noise. And the minister took his keys and went to the church, and he entered it. The bell's tone ceased, but he heard a faint sigh from the belfry. And he said, "Who's there?" He asked in a loud voice. "Who's disturbing the peace of this church?" And footsteps passed down the bell tower steps. And he saw a little boy coming towards him. "Don't be angry," said the boy. "I slept in here when the bell was rung from the vespers. My mother is very ill." And his tears choked him and he could not speak. The minister patted on the cheek and encouraged the boy to tell him his story frankly. "They say that my mother, my sweet and good mother, is going to die. But I've heard tell that when people are sick unto death, they may live to be well again if someone dares enter the church and at midnight scrape a little rust from the church bell. That will keep death away. So I came here and hid myself till I heard the clock strike 12. I was afraid. I thought of dead people rising from the grave and of their coming to the church. Dare not look out of the churchyard, but as I said the Lord's Prayer and scraped the rust off the bell." "Come, my brave child," said the minister. "The good Lord will not forsake you or your mother." They went together to the poor cottage where the sick woman lay, and she was sound, peacefully asleep. And God granted that she should live, and his blessings shone on her and her child. Fingers crossed that he made it. And then there's the third one. When's legend about a poor young man called Paul Vendelbo, who came to be a great man. He was highly honoured. He was born in Jutland, and after he had struggled hard and studied so well that he got through his examination as a scholar, he felt a greater ambition still, to be shot and to stroll around whilst in faraway lands. And one day he was walking along the ramparts of Copenhagen with two young prosperous comrades, and he was telling them all about his ambition, and all of a sudden he stopped and looked up at the window of the house where a young daughter of a professor was sitting, and he found her astonishingly pretty. And when Paul's comrade saw how he blushed, they said as a joke, "Paul, if you get her to give you a kiss in front of the window, when we can see it, we'll give you the money you need to travel. Then you can see if fortune favours you better abroad than at home." And Paul Vendelbo went to the house and knocked at the parlour door. "My father is not at home," the young girl told him. "Don't be angry," he begged her, as all the blood rushed up to his cheek, "but it's not your father I want." And he told her frankly of his wholehearted ambition of adventure out into the world and to make an honourable name for himself. He told her of his two friends that were standing outside and how they had promised him his travelling expensive. Of her own free will, she would give him a kiss at the open window. And he looked at her so bashfully, so honourably, and so frankly that her anger died away. "It is wrong for you to propose such a thing to a modest young girl," she told him, "but you look so honest that I won't stand in the way of good fortune." She led him to the window and gave him a kiss. And his comrades kept to their bargain and gave him the money, so he went into the service of the Tsar of Russia, made a name for himself at the Battle of Pultowa, and honours were heaped upon him, and afterwards, when Denmark stood in need of him, he came home and became a man of the might in his army and the council of the king. Löwennorn, they call him, which means lion eagle. And one day he again entered the professor's monastery, and he was not the professor he wanted, but the professor's daughter, Ingeborg Findig, the girl who gave him a kiss, his good fortune began. And 14 days later, poor Vendelbo Löwennorn celebrated his wedding. And then 4. This is the 4th one now. So yeah, the enemy once made a great attack on the Danish island of Fyn. Only one village was left standing, and this was soon to be sacked and burned. And 2 people lived in a low roof house at the edge of town, and it was a dark winter's night, and the enemy were expected to in any minute. And 2 poor anxious people opened their psalm book, see if they could find anything in help or to comfort them. And they opened their book and turned to the psalm, "A mighty fortress is our God." And full of confidence, they sang the psalm, and their faith was renewed, and they went to bed and slept well in the care of their Lord. In the morning, when they awoke, they found the room entirely dark, and there was no glimmer of daylight, and the door would not open when they tried. They climbed into the loft and opened a trapdoor to the roof, from which they saw that it was broad daylight. But a heavy snow had fallen in the night, and it had drifted over the whole house and hidden it from the enemies, who had pillaged and burned the house down during the night. And 2 people clasped their hands in thankfulness, and they sang again, "A mighty fortress is our God." For he had shielded them from and raised the rampart from the snow like around the home. Well, now moving on to 5. In North Zealand, they tell a dark mystery that challenges one's imagination. The church of Rovig lies far out among the sand dunes of the stormy Kattegat. And one evening a great ship came to anchor offshore, and it seemed to be a Russian man of war. And there was a knock at the parsonage door, and several people, armed and masked, demanded that the minister put on his robes and come out with him out to the church. And they promised to pay him well, and they threatened him if he should refuse to go, and so he went. And he found the church lighted, and unknown people gathered there, and all was in deep silence. A bride and groom waited in front of the altar. The magnificent clothes they wore suggested the highest rank, but the bride was deeply pale. And when the marriage ceremony ended, a shot rang out, and the bride fell dead at the altar. And the people took her corpse and went away with it, and the next morning the ship was gone. And to this day no one has been able to give any explanation of what actually happened. And the minister who took part in it wrote the whole story down in his Bible, which his family kept to this day, and the old church still stands between the sand dunes, near the tossing waters of Kattegat, and the story still lives in memory and in writing. Moving on to 6, as there's another church legend. As church is still, as religion is still kind of a big thing to a lot of people. And on the island of Falster, a part of Denmark, there lived a lady of rank and wealth, and she had no children, and her family were about to die. So she took part of her wealth and built a magnificent church. When it finished and the candles were lighted, she knelt at the altar and prayed that for her pious gift, God would grant her life upon earth, as long as her church should stand, and years went by, her relatives died, and her old friends and acquaintances and all her old servants were laid in their graves. But she who made such an evil wish did not die. As generation after generation grew up and were strangers to her, she did not go and see anyone, and no one. And she wasted away in a long dotage, abandoned and alone. Her senses grew dull, and she was like someone asleep, but not quite like a dead person. Every Christmas Eve life flashed up in her for a moment, and she got back to the use of her voice, and she would order her new servants to put her in an oak coffin and carry it to a graveyard in the church, and the minister asked to come and receive her commands, and laid her coffin and brought it to the church. And she wished every Christmas night the minister came through the choir to the coffin and raised the coffin lid for the weary old lady who lay there after finding rest. Is my church still standing? She would ask in a tremulous voice, and when the minister answered, "It still stands," she would give a deep sigh and sadly fall back into a coffin, and the minister closed down the lid and come again on next Christmas Eve, and the next, and the cycle would repeat itself. And there's no stone of the church left in standing, and no trace of the buried dead there. A large white thorn grows in a field there and blooms every spring as a sign of the resurrection of life. It said that it grows on the spots where they placed the coffin of the high-born lady, where dust at last became dust of the earth. Then there's seven. And there's an old saying that when the Lord drove the rebellious angels out from heaven, he let some of them fall among his hills, where they still live and are called hobgoblins, or trolls, as they always flee in terror when they hear thunder, which they believe is the wrath of heaven. And others fell down in the alder marshes, and they are called elves. And they are among the women who are very beautiful to look at, but are not to be trusted. And their backs are hollow as a baker's dough trough, and others fell into old farms and houses, and they became dwarves and goblins. Sometimes they have dealings with men, and may have strange stories to be told. And in Jutland, a hobgoblin who lived with many other trolls in a large hill, and one of his daughters was married to the village blacksmith. He was said to be a bad man, and he beat his wife until she tired of it, and just as he was about to beat her one day, she took a horseshoe and broke it upon him. She had such tremendous strength that she could have easily broken him into pieces too. And he thought about this and did not beat her again, but the gossip spread the story abroad. The country people no longer respected her. Now that they know that her to be a troll's daughter, no one in the parish would have anything to do with her. And the hobgoblin heard of this, and one day the blacksmith, his wife, and other parishioners were in churchyard waiting for the parson. The blacksmith's wife looked out over the bay where fog was riding. "Here comes father. Father," she said, "and he is angry." He came, and angry he was. "And will he throw them to me, or would you rather do the catching?" he asked, and looked with greedy eyes upon the church people. "I'll do the catching," she said, and for she knew very well that he would not handle them gently if they fell in his hands. The hobgoblin seized one and after another, and she flung them over the roof of the church, while his daughter stood on the far side and caught them, and gently as she could. And from that time on she got along very nicely with the parishioners, and they were afraid of the hobgoblin and his many fellow trolls that were scattered around the country. And the best people could do was probably avoid quarrelling with him and try and turn his acquaintances to their profit, and everyone knew that trolls had big big kettles full of gold. As well worthwhile getting a handful of the money. But to do so they had to be clever and as tricky as the farmer, of whom shall be told, and yeah, of the farmer's boy who tended pigs and was even cleverer than his own master. As the farmer had a hill among the fields, which he did not want to leave idle, so he ploughed it, but the hobgoblin who lived there under the hill came out and asked him, "How dare you plough my roof?" "I did not know it was your roof," said the farmer, "but it is neither for us to allow the land to lie idle. Let me plough and plant. The first year you may take what is growing above the ground, and I shall reap what grows in the earth. The next year we shall change it around." And then the bargain was made. And the first year the farmer planted carrots, the second year he sowed wheat. The hobgoblin got the tops of the carrots and the roots of the wheat. And this way they lived in harmony. But it happened that there was to be a christening at the farmer's house. I was greatly embarrassed because he could not very well avoid inviting the hobgoblin, with whom he was on such good terms with. But if the troll should accept his invitation, the farmer would get a bad name with the minister and with all the other people of the parish, and clever though the farmer usually was this time, he didn't know what to do, as he mentioned his trouble to the boy who tended his pigs and who was even more clever than he. "No, I will help you," said the boy said, and he took a large bag and went to cut out to the hill where the hobgoblin lived, and he knocked and was let in. And when he came to invite the hobgoblin to the christening, and the hobgoblin accepted the invitation and promised to come. "I suppose I'll have to give a christening present, won't I?" "They usually do," said the boy. The troll poured money into it. Is that enough?" The boy lifted the bag and said, "Most people give as much." When all the gold in the big money kettle had been poured into the bag, the boy said, "Nobody gives more and most less." "Tell me now," said the hobgoblin, "what honoured guests are you expecting?" "3 parsons and a bishop," said the boy. "That's fine, such gentlemen care only for eating and drinking, they won't bother me. Who else will come?" "Mother Mary is expected," said the boy. But I think there will still be a little place for me behind the stove." "Who else is coming? Will be there?" "Well, there's the Lord." "You don't say so, but such extremely distinguished guests usually come later and leave early." "While they are there I'll just step out for a moment. What sort of music will you have?" "Drum music," said the boy. "The Lord has ordered a heavy thunder of drum music to which we shall dance. Drum music it will be." "It wasn't that dreadful," our goblin cried. Thank you, master, for his information, but I will prefer to stay at home. Doesn't he know that thundering and drumming terrify me and all of my people? Once, when I went for a walk in my younger days, the thunder began drumming, and one of the drumsticks thumped me from my thigh so hard that the bone cracked. I'll have no more of that sort of music. So just give the farmer my thanks and my present." The boy took the bag on his back and but his master, flashing along with the troll's best wishes. So yeah, it's a nice little thing, so yeah. I'll see you all tomorrow and all. And yeah, bye for now.